What happens when a man who rebuilt his life from ashes sits across from a woman who has made a career out of speaking truths others avoid? That morning on The View, no one in the studio, or watching at home, was prepared for how quickly the air would sharpen, how fast charm would collide with conviction, or how Robert Downey Jr. and Whoopi Goldberg would lock into a clash that seemed to pull the entire room into its gravity. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button to join Stage View right now, and like and comment to stay part of these explosive Hollywood moments as they unfold. It began the moment Robert stepped onto the stage. The audience lifted into applause, not just polite TV cheering, but that warm, reverent wave people reserve for someone they feel they've watched survive a lifetime in public. Robert gave his small, almost shy smile, bowing his head, fingers tapping together in a rhythm he used when he was keeping himself centered. He was dressed intentionally casual, dark blazer, soft t-shirt, that familiar air of, I'd rather be joking than serious. But his eyes were awake, alive in that way that told you he wasn't just here to talk. He was ready to feel his way through this, wherever it went. Whoopi watched him as he approached the table with the kind of measured calm she reserved for guests who were unpredictable in the most interesting ways. She leaned back slightly, chin lifted, not hostile, just assessing. The other hosts smiled warmly, almost oblivious to the subtle friction already beginning to form in the space between the two. The cameras rolled. The lights steadied. The audience hushed. Robert adjusted his chair, exhaling a breath that barely registered in his microphone. "Well," he said with that signature smirk, "this feels like I'm stepping into an arena. Should I have brought a shield?" Laughter. A good start. The kind that loosens shoulders. Whoopi's eyebrow lifted. "Depends on how honest you plan to be today." That line floated in the air for half a beat too long. The audience reaction stuttered, half laugh, half breath. Robert's smirk bent into something smaller, tighter, as if the comment touched a pressure point he hadn't expected so early. Robert nodded slowly, clasping his hands. "Honesty's never been my problem, Whoopi. Timing, maybe. Delivery, sure. But honesty?" He shrugged lightly. "I've been honest enough to get myself into trouble more times than I can count." "Trouble," Whoopi repeated, tapping her pen against the table. "Yep, we know." This time the audience didn't laugh. They waited. Sonny leaned forward with a smoothing voice, trying to pull the tension back into a middle lane. "Robert, your new documentary is getting so much praise for how vulnerable you were willing to be." "Yeah," he said, eyes flicking toward her. That was the point. Whoopi didn't break eye contact with him. Not once. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was sharp, almost theatrical. But it wasn't scripted. No one on that set had expected things to veer this direction so early. "Since we're talking honesty," Whoopi said at last, "there's something I want to ask you right off the bat. Because you've built this whole second life on transparency. On redemption. And trust me, I respect that. But some people, some critics, say you've been selective. That you talk about the struggles that make you look inspiring, but not the ones that make you look accountable." A collective inhale pulsed through the studio. Robert didn't move at first. His fingers froze mid-tap. His jaw flexed once, almost imperceptibly. "That's a heavy accusation to start with," he finally said. "I'm not accusing you," Whoopi replied. "I'm asking you what you think." Robert sat back, folding his arms. "What do I think?" He gave a short laugh, dry, more like an exhale than humor. "I think people love to decide which chapter of someone's life they want to hold up as the real one." The audience reacted softly, sympathetic, but unsettled. Whoopi leaned in. "And do you think you've been completely, fully transparent? No holding back? No polishing?" Robert's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. "You want the truth? That's the entire job," Whoopi said. He nodded slowly. "Okay, truth. Every human being edits themselves. Every interview is edited. Every documentary is edited. You really think any of us, actors, hosts, humans, walk around narrating the raw, unfiltered version of our lives?" She opened her mouth, but he cut in gently, not aggressively. "No, none of us do. But I've been honest about the things that matter." "And who decides what matters?" Whoopi asked, voice lowering. A murmur rippled through the audience. Robert let the question settle into him. His expression shifted, quieter, more grounded. "I decide," he said. "And so do the people who lived through those chapters with me." The hosts exchanged glances. Something heavy had been struck, an invisible nerve most interviews would never touch. The conversation drifted momentarily into safer territory as the producers signaled behind the cameras, trying to guide them back to the documentary, the film projects, the uplifting angle. And Robert played along for a moment, talking about his father, talking about the industry, talking about the gratitude he carried. But the earlier exchange hadn't faded. It lingered between them like an unfinished sentence. And then, like a thread being pulled taut, Whoopi returned to it. "There's one thing," she said carefully, "that people online talk about a lot. Something they feel you gloss over when you talk about your past." Robert's eyes flickered. A small shadow crossed his face. Here it was. The room felt like it leaned forward. "And what's that?" he asked. Whoopi placed her pen down. She didn't smile. She didn't soften the blow. "People want to know if you've ever apologized directly to the people you hurt. The ones who weren't in documentaries. The ones who weren't on set with cameras. The ones who lived through the chaos of you before you became this version of yourself." The entire set went still. Robert tried to breathe in slowly, but the microphone caught the tiny tremor at the start of that breath. He looked down once, then back up. "You know," he said, voice quieter, "the world loves a redemption story. But redemption isn't something I owe the public. It's something I owe the people I hurt. And have you given it to them?" Whoopi pressed. The tension in the room doubled. He inhaled sharply. "Some of them, yes. Some I've reached out to. Some I still talk to. And some," he stopped himself. The pause felt like it stretched 5 seconds, maybe 10. "Some don't want to hear from me. Ever again. And I respect that." Whoopi nodded slowly, but the silence after the nod was loaded. Heavy. Unspoken judgment. Or maybe just unspoken curiosity. "So," she said, "you're saying there are still people out there carrying the fallout from your past. And you're just accepting that?" Robert blinked. "Accepting? No. Living with. Yes." A deep hum rolled through the audience. Part agreement, part discomfort. Sonny tried to soften again. "Robert, I think what Whoopi is asking is—" "No," Whoopi interrupted gently, eyes still on him. "I'm asking if he thinks that's enough." Robert exhaled harshly, the first flash of irritation slipping through his calm. "What would you have me do, Whoopi? Knock on every door of every person who ever crossed paths with me in the darkest years of my life? Force apologies onto people who don't want to hear them? That's not healing. That's selfish." The audience reacted, some gasping, some nodding, some murmuring in debate. The studio felt like a live wire sparking. Whoopi tilted her head. "But don't you think it also might be unfinished business?" Those 2 words, unfinished business, hit him like a stone. Inside him, something shifted. Something old. Something bruised. But he didn't show anger. He didn't raise his voice. He just leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at her with steady, quiet intensity. "I spent years trying to clean up the wreckage of my old life," he said. "Years. Not months. Not a PR cycle. Years. And if the world wants to believe that I cherry-pick the parts of my past that make a good story, that's fine. But the people who matter, they know what efforts I've made. And you think that's enough?" Whoopi asked again, unrelenting. Robert didn't answer immediately. The silence grew so deep the producers didn't dare cut to commercial, even though they were late. The tension was too rich, too real. Finally, Robert said, "I think it's all anyone can do." The audience had no idea how to react. Half clapped. Half stayed silent. All confused. The segment was supposed to pivot there, but instead Whoopi leaned back, folding her arms, and said, "I'm not convinced." Robert's face changed, just slightly, but enough that the entire room felt it. For the first time since walking onto the stage, he seemed genuinely rattled. And the moment cracked the air open. Because what no one realized, not the hosts, not the producers, not even Robert himself, was that Whoopi wasn't done. Not by a long shot. And what she said next would ignite a spark that would carry this confrontation into one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television all year. The cameras didn't cut. The producers didn't move. The audience leaned in as if gravity itself had shifted toward the center of the table. Robert sat with his fingers interlocked, the faintest tremor in his right thumb, while Whoopi kept her gaze pinned on him with the patience of someone waiting for a truth she was certain existed beneath the surface. It was Sunny who sensed the danger first. Her eyes flicked from Whoopi to the stage manager to the clock. They were 2 minutes past the scheduled commercial break. The red signal light above the camera was still glowing, unblinking. "Whoopi," she said softly, almost a warning. But Whoopi didn't look away. "You know," she began, her voice calm but edged with something sharper. "A lot of people admire you, Robert. People who struggled, people who clawed themselves back from rock bottom. You're a symbol, and symbols carry weight. Robert sat up straighter. Yeah, I'm aware. Are you? Whoopi asked. Because here's the thing, when you become a symbol, your past stops being just your story. It becomes part of everyone else's. And some folks think you like to stand in the light of your redemption without always acknowledging the cost of the shadows behind it. A small gasp fluttered through the audience, almost like they were watching gladiators, not celebrities, circle each other. Robert held her stare, but there was something new in his eyes now. Not anger, not defensiveness, something closer to exhaustion. The kind that comes from having lived your mistakes so thoroughly that you thought nothing new could be said about them. He took a slow breath. I've never claimed to be perfect. No one's asking you to be, Whoopi replied. They're asking you to be complete. Those words settled heavily between them. Robert opened his mouth to respond, but Joy, perhaps sensing a spark about to ignite, jumped in with a forced laugh. Well, now that we've solved the meaning of life, maybe we should talk about his movie before he changes his mind and walks out of here. The audience chuckled, grateful for the momentary reprieve. But the shift didn't last. Whoopi leaned forward, elbows on the table, closing the distance. Robert, you said earlier that some people don't want to hear from you, and that you respect that. But I want to ask you something deeper than that. Robert raised an eyebrow, bracing himself. Do you ever feel, Whoopi said, her voice lowering, like part of you is still hiding? The question hit him like a blow he didn't see coming. His eyes widened, just slightly, and something raw flickered beneath his composure. A flash of vulnerability, the kind that only shows when someone says something too close to the truth. The studio was silent. No one moved. Even the steady hum of the overhead lights suddenly seemed too loud. Robert swallowed. Why would you think I'm hiding? Because, Whoopi said, people who've been to the darkest parts of themselves, they don't usually talk about it with as much polish as you do. Not unless they're protecting something. That line cut straight through him. Robert's breath hitched. He turned his head slightly, as if trying to break eye contact, but he couldn't. Her words had found an old wound, one he thought he'd patched over. He forced a smile, thin, fragile. You think my past is a PR strategy? Whoopi shook her head. I think your past is a story you've learned to control. But the parts you can't control, the ones that still scare you, you don't talk about those. The emotion rippled through the room. Something electric, something fragile. For the first time since sitting down, Robert looked genuinely shaken. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. You're not wrong, he said quietly. The audience murmured, startled. Robert continued, his voice softer now. There are things about my past I don't talk about. Not because I'm hiding them. Because they still hurt. Because even after all these years, they still scare me. Whoopi nodded slowly. That's the honesty people want from you. That's not honesty, Robert said. That's trauma. And not everything needs to be televised. The audience erupted, applause, shouts, whistles, the tension suddenly exploding. Some people stood, others clapped with conviction. The moment struck a nerve, not just with Robert and Whoopi, but with everyone watching. Whoopi waited for the noise to settle. I respect that. Truly. But let me ask you something else, because I think this is where the heart of the conversation really is. Robert's shoulders tensed again. Do you feel you've truly forgiven yourself? The question hung in the air like smoke. Robert blinked, stunned. That's not what this was supposed to be about. But it is, Whoopi insisted softly. Because if you haven't forgiven yourself, that's why you still feel like you're running. That's why you're still explaining yourself. That's why your redemption feels incomplete. Robert's fingers trembled again, but he didn't hide it this time. He placed both hands on the table, grounding himself. I don't know if forgiveness is something I've ever earned, he whispered. The audience went still. Not even a cough. Not even a shift in a seat. Whoopi's voice lowered. It's not something you earn. It's something you accept. Robert shook his head. And what if I can't? Whoopi softened for the first time. Then that's the part you're still carrying. And that's why people feel your story has pieces missing. The vulnerability in his eyes was unmistakable now. This wasn't performance. This wasn't a soundbite. This was a man who had spent decades navigating the remnants of a war he started within himself. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice trembling. You want the truth? The real truth? Some nights, yeah. I still feel like that guy. The one who messed up everything. The one who hurt people. The one who almost didn't make it out. The audience gasped, not loudly, but in one collective, emotional inhale. He continued, voice cracking. And every time I stand on a stage or sit at a table like this, I wonder if today is the day someone reminds the world of the things I can't undo. Whoopi's expression softened further, unexpectedly, almost reluctantly. Robert, she said gently, no one here is trying to break you. He looked into her eyes, pain and gratitude both flickering in the reflection of the studio lights. It felt like it, he said. That wasn't my intention, she said. My intention was to ask the questions that everyone else is too afraid to ask you. Why? He asked. Because someone has to, Whoopi replied simply. The audience murmured, some in agreement, others uncomfortable. Robert took another breath, steadying himself. Well, you picked quite a stage for it. Whoopi shrugged lightly. The truth never comes out in private rooms. It comes out when people are listening. He gave a small laugh, sad but real. You're tougher than the MCU press tours. Those don't scare you, she said. This does. He didn't deny it. The moment was raw, honest, almost unbearably intimate. But then, unexpectedly, the turning point came. Whoopi leaned back, arms crossing again. Here's what I think, Robert. I think you're stronger than you realize. But I also think you're still afraid of one thing. Robert straightened. What's that? You're afraid, Whoopi said slowly, that if you're too honest, people won't forgive you. Those words struck him like lightning. He blinked once, twice. Then everything inside him shifted. Like a tower he'd been holding upright on trembling pillars, finally giving way to gravity. And in that quiet collapse, a different flame sparked in him. Not anger, not defensiveness. Resolve. He leaned in, eyes locked on Whoopi. You want honesty? The real kind? Then fine. Ask me whatever you want. No filter. The audience erupted, cheers, shock, adrenaline flooding the room. Whoopi didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. Then let's talk, she said. The moment they returned from the delayed commercial break, the energy in the studio felt unmistakably different. The air was charged, almost vibrating, as if everyone, hosts, audience members, crew, knew they were stepping into territory daytime television rarely dared to cross. Robert sat upright now, shoulders squared, jaw set with deliberate calm. Whoopi mirrored him, arms uncrossed this time, hands folded lightly as though preparing for a conversation that required both precision and courage. The stage lights brightened. The red recording light returned. And once again, all eyes fell on the two figures sitting across from each other, locked in a tension that felt more like a negotiation between truth and survival. Robert spoke first. You said I could answer anything. So go ahead. Whoopi inhaled slowly. All right, then let's start where we left off. A ripple moved through the audience. Anticipation, nerves, a collective tightening of breath. Earlier, Whoopi continued, you talked about people who won't speak to you anymore. People you hurt. People who still carry scars. I want to ask you something more pointed. Robert didn't look away. Ask. Do you believe there are still parts of your past, she said, choosing each word with care, that you haven't taken responsibility for? The question hit like a blade slipped beneath armor. Robert didn't flinch physically, but something tightened behind his eyes, something deep. He leaned forward slightly. Responsibility is complicated. Not really, Whoopi countered. It's actually pretty simple. You've said many times you were young, reckless, addicted, spiraling. But that doesn't erase the damage. So I'm asking you, do you think you've faced all of it? Honestly? Robert paused. It wasn't a dramatic pause. It was a searching one. I've tried, he said quietly. Tried isn't the same as done, Whoopi said. The audience murmured again, unsettled, leaning into the discomfort. It was the kind of conversation people often avoided in their own lives, now playing out under the glare of national television. Robert let out a slow, controlled exhale. Whoopi, if I could go back and fix every broken piece, I would. But I can't. All I can do is show up now. Be better now. Give what I couldn't give then. And that's admirable, Whoopi said, softening for a fraction of a second. But you didn't answer the question. He stared at her. For a moment, his composure wavered, just long enough for the camera to catch the flicker of something raw. No, he said finally. I don't think I've faced everything. The audience gasped, just loud enough to echo. Robert continued, voice unsteady, but steadying itself with each word. There are things I still avoid. Things that feel too heavy. Memories I'd rather forget. People I wronged who I'm too ashamed to reach out to. It's not because I don't care. It's because some parts of my past, they scare me. They still scare me. Whoopi nodded slowly, almost gently. Thank you for saying that. Robert met her gaze. It's not easy. Good, Whoopi replied. Honesty isn't supposed to be. Joy raised a hand, finally stepping into the emotional fire. This is a lot, she said. And I think we should acknowledge that Robert has done more work on himself than most people ever will. Robert gave her a grateful glance, but Whoopi wasn't finished. Robert, she said, I want to ask you something that might be the most important question of this conversation. He braced himself. Okay, do you think, she said slowly, the world forgave you too quickly? A ripple moved through the audience, louder this time. People whispered, sat forward, exchanged glances. Even the camera operators seemed to stiffen. Robert blinked, shocked. Too quickly. Yes. Why would you say that? Because, Whoopi replied, Hollywood loves a comeback. The media loves a headline. And people love rooting for the fallen. But did the world forgive you because you earned it? Or because it was convenient? Because you were charismatic? Because the narrative was profitable? Robert's jaw tightened. Are you saying my redemption is fake? No, Whoopi said firmly. I'm saying the world sometimes forgives people because it's easier than holding them accountable. Robert let the words sink into him like cold water. He leaned back, staring into the lights overhead as though searching for something. Patience, composure, maybe courage. His voice, when it emerged, was quieter but sharper. You know what's funny, he said. People talk about my comeback like it was some kind of gift. Like Hollywood welcomed me with open arms. But the truth is, I fought for every inch. Every interview. Every audition. Every second chance. Whoopi listened, expression unreadable. You think the world forgave me quickly? He continued. Try being the person everyone whispers about. Try walking into a room and feeling people wonder if you'll melt down. Try working twice as hard as everyone else just to convince someone you won't implode. His voice edged with emotion. I didn't get here because people forgave me too fast. I got here because I refused to let my worst moments define the rest of my life. The audience applauded, loud, supportive, emotional. But Whoopi's silence cut through the noise. She waited for the clapping to fade before speaking. I'm not questioning your work, she said. I'm questioning the public's willingness to overlook the impact of your past. There's a difference. Robert looked down for a long moment. When he lifted his head again, there was a heaviness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe they did, he admitted. Maybe the world forgave me before I forgave myself. Maybe that's why everything still feels unfinished. Whoopi softened slightly. There it is. He gave a humorless laugh. You're really good at this, you know. It's what I do, she replied. The audience chuckled gently, but the laughter was thin, careful, like stepping onto fragile ice. Sunny leaned in again, her tone warm. Robert, is there something you feel you still need to face? Something you've avoided? Robert stiffened. Whoopi watched him closely. Too closely. He swallowed hard. There are things I wish I could say to certain people, he said. But I don't know if I ever will. Why not? Whoopi asked. Because, he said, voice lowering, some things don't get fixed. And sometimes you have to live with the consequences. The room fell silent again. It was a silence that carried weight, history, and the unmistakable tremor of a man standing on the edge of a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to voice. Whoopi spoke very softly now. Robert, if you could speak to them, those people you hurt, what would you say? Robert froze. His breath caught. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The audience watched breathless as his eyes glimmered, just slightly, with the hint of tears not yet shed. He took a long breath, exhaling like he was letting something leave his body for the first time. I'd tell them I'm sorry, he whispered. Not because it fixes anything. Not because it erases anything. But because I carry them with me. Every day. The audience erupted, claps, gasps, emotional shouts. A standing ovation from several rows. The moment was raw, real, and overwhelming. Whoopi watched him with an expression that was no longer confrontational, but contemplative, like she was reassessing the entire conversation in real time. Robert wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his finger, laughing softly to break the tension. Well, he said, this is going a lot deeper than I expected on daytime TV. Whoopi finally smiled, small, sincere. Sometimes the truth takes you where you didn't plan to go. Robert nodded. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. But just when it felt like the emotional climax had been reached, Whoopi leaned forward and asked one final question. One that neither he nor the audience saw coming. And after everything, do you believe you deserve to be where you are now? The room went silent again, deeper than before. Robert's expression shifted. This was the strike that would push the confrontation into the explosive territory fans would debate online for weeks. And his answer would ignite the moment that made this interview go viral. The question hit like a fault line cracking open beneath the table. Do you believe you deserve to be where you are now? The studio froze. The audience went so silent the microphones picked up the faint buzzing of overhead lights. Robert stared at Whoopi, the words hanging between them with a weight that felt almost physical, pressed into his chest. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Joy's hand hovering near her mug, Sunny's brow furrowing, Alyssa swallowing hard as though bracing for something none of them could predict. Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back, slowly, as if the chair itself had become fragile, and stared toward the audience. Not at the faces, not at the lights, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that the first few rows leaned forward instinctively. I don't think, he said softly, that anyone who's been where I've been ever really believes they deserve anything. The audience murmured, soft, sympathetic, but unsettled. Robert continued, eyes locked on some invisible point just past the camera lens. For years, I woke up every morning wondering if I was still the same person. If I'd ever outrun the worst parts of myself. If I'd ever make enough amends. If I'd ever be worthy. Whoopi watched him, expression unreadable. Robert's voice grew stronger. I fought for my life. Literally. And I rebuilt it. Slowly. Painfully. Not because I thought I deserved success again, but because I didn't want to die. The room shifted, the atmosphere tilting into something rawer, more human. But as for deserving where I am now, Robert said, I don't know. Maybe I'll never know. What I do know is that I show up every day trying to earn it. Not from Hollywood. Not from the public. From myself. The studio erupted, applause that wasn't merely supportive, but emotional, grateful, relieved. Some audience members stood. Some shouted encouragement. It was the kind of reaction reserved for moments that transcended television. But then Whoopi raised a hand gently, signaling the crowd to settle. Robert, she said quietly, thank you for saying that. Truly. He nodded, still catching his breath. But, she continued, I didn't mean it as a trap. I asked because I wanted to know if, after everything you've been through, you allow yourself any grace. Robert blinked. Grace? You talk like a man still paying off a lifetime debt, Whoopi said. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, includes yourself too. And if you never let yourself feel deserving, then you're still living in the past you crawled out of. Her words hit him harder than any criticism before. He looked down. His fingers curled tightly on the table, knuckles whitening. I don't know how to give myself that, he admitted. Then maybe, Whoopi said, it's time you learned. The audience reacted with a soft, emotional hum, moved by a shift no one expected. The tension that once cut the room like blades had transformed. It wasn't adversarial anymore. It was something more vulnerable, almost compassionate. Sunny leaned in gently. Robert, you don't have to carry the weight forever. Joy nodded. At some point, you have to put the bag down or it'll crush you. Robert let out a trembling laugh. I feel like I'm in therapy on national television. Whoopi smiled for the first time all morning, small, real. Good. Maybe daytime TV could use more honesty and less pretending. For a moment, the table softened. Every host leaning into the shared humanity of the moment. And Robert, eyes misting again, allowed himself to sit in the stillness that followed. But the moment wasn't done with him. One audience member shouted unexpectedly, We love you, Robert. He looked up, almost startled, then broke into a full, unguarded smile. The kind that came from the soul, not the camera. Thank you, he said. Really? The showrunners signaled frantically. They were far, far past their segment time. But no one at the table seemed willing to cut the moment short. Then Robert turned to Whoopi, an unexpected glint in his eyes. You know, you hit harder than any interviewer I've ever sat across from. She chuckled. You can handle it. Maybe, he said. But I wasn't ready for it. Sometimes the truth doesn't wait for readiness, she replied. Robert looked at her with something new, respect. Deep, earned respect. I appreciate it, he said, even if it didn't feel like appreciation at first. Good, Whoopi said. Growth never feels good when it's happening. Another ripple of laughter, light, but still carrying the emotional residue of what had just unfolded. Then Robert inhaled deeply and turned toward the camera, not with bravado, not with performance, but with a sincerity so striking it felt like the entire country paused to listen. I want to say something, he said. To anyone watching who's been through hell, or caused hell, or is trying to rebuild from something they thought would destroy them, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep trying. Every day, even when it hurts. The audience erupted again, louder than before. Whoopi nodded, almost proud. Sunny blinked back tears. Joy placed a hand over her heart. Alyssa whispered, "Wow," under her breath. The camera zoomed out. The segment was ending. But the moment was not. Because the confrontation, unexpected, emotional, unfiltered, was already rippling across social media. Fans and critics alike were clipping the exchange, reacting, debating, arguing, praising. Within minutes, Robert Downey Jr. on The View began trending. Hashtags exploded. Comment sections filled with think pieces, emotional outpourings, heated debates. Some viewers praised Whoopi for pushing him beyond polished answers. Others accused her of going too far. Millions watched the clip within hours. And at the center of it all was that singular moment. A man facing the shadow of who he used to be, and a woman determined to make him confront the part of himself the world rarely saw. Back in the studio, as the outro music played, Robert stood from his chair. Whoopi rose too. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Robert extended his hand. Whoopi shook it. No tension. No anger. Just two people, two lives, two histories, meeting in a place of uneasy truth. "You're tough," Robert said quietly. "So are you," Whoopi replied. He nodded once. "Thank you for everything. Anytime." And as he walked off the stage, applause filled the room again. Warm, thunderous, profoundly human. The moment would echo online, on talk shows, across fan communities and entertainment news for days. Articles would dissect it. Commentators would interpret it. Fans would defend one side or the other. And countless viewers would replay the clip that captured something real, something vulnerable, something messy, and undeniably unforgettable. A confrontation no one expected. A transformation everyone felt. And as the screen faded to black, the final voice of the narrator, your voice, pulled the audience back into the present moment. If you watched this entire confrontation unfold, I want to hear from you. What did you think of Robert Downey Jr.'s emotional showdown with Whoopi Goldberg? Whose side are you on, and what moment hit you the hardest? Let your voice be heard in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, dramatic, and unforgettable Hollywood moments. Your support means everything. So hit that like button, share this video, and stay tuned. The next story might be even bigger. The story ends, but the conversation is just beginning.